So this is a listening of Brown v. Board of Education 1. We call it Brown v. Board of Education 2. It takes place a year later. And that's because the Supreme Court made its decision, said that separate but equal laws are, in terms of public education, are inherently unconstitutional, strikes it down with the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause, and then provides absolutely no guidance about what to do in the wake of its decision. And think about the monumental changes that would have to take place everywhere to have a desegregated school system. Um, Redrawing of districts, enforcement. There's a myriad of things that arise to this very significant change in terms of governance, but at a very local level. So this case was brought up to determine what the court and how individuals should, basically how these districts should react. Um, so because what ultimately decides, and it says background issue decision, we're not going to worry about that because that's really not the form that this case takes, at least very neatly. So Warren weighs in, the court weighs in and says that, well, basically public schools are local by nature, and they're controlled local because of what they are. So they decide that local courts should actually control the implementation process of Brown 1. So the Supreme Court gives the power of implementation to local federal district courts whose proximity to the public education systems would best be able to implement the Brown 1 decision. So those courts which have to oversee this implementation are embedded within the locality of where that integration is taking place. And really the second part to this is that how fast should these district courts push these local school districts to actually comply with the decision of Brown 1? We know it's not going to be an overnight process. No one thought it would be. But you have to provide some guidance to when do we expect you, local school districts, to comply with the decision that we've handed down in Brown 1. And the answer that the court gives here is resoundingly unhelpful, because the answer that the court gives is you must desegregate, quote, with all deliberate speed. No one knows what with all deliberate speed means. It sounds good, but it doesn't actually provide any guidance. It won't shock you to note, there was massive resistance to the Brown 1 decision in the South. And so when segregationists in the South heard the phrase, with all deliberate speed, that's exactly what they wanted to hear. So while the Supreme Court in Brown 1 makes this really quite amazing for the time decision in terms of the breadth of how much coverage it took, they followed up a year later with basically a wink and a nod to segregationists in the South and also the federal district court judges in the South, and basically said, take your time. Like, you have to get there eventually, but that's where we're looking at you. We want eventually to happen, but do it at your own speed. Do it with all deliberate speed, whatever that means. But that's exactly what segregationists in the South wanted to hear. And it's what the court functionally gets them. So the school board, the local school board, can say stuff like, we're simply going as fast as we can possibly go, and do nothing. They can drag their feet and wait. And because of this, the Supreme Court really has to deal with this issue again. It comes back up, and in 1964, the court has to articulate a new decision and says in that particular case that there has been entirely too much deliberation and not enough speed. So this decision sort of, whereas it looks like Brown 1 sets sort of a breakneck pace for change in the United States, Brown 2 puts the brakes on that change almost immediately and allows those within the South to continue to resist the inevitability of desegregation.